So yeah, it feels good. It
Yeah.
feels it's like in the moment around diet and people embracing simple whole foods is really, and high protein is coming into focus in a time that's great for us. So it's exciting to be riding this wave right now.
Yeah. Well, I just pressed record, so we're just going to jump into it. We're here with Anya Fernald, who is the founder of Belcampo Meats. Anya, welcome to the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
Yeah. So I ask this usually of doctors and nutritionists and scientists where it's relevant. But my typical first question is, what time is it where you are, and what have you put into your body?
Okay, it is 2:10 p.m. I have put into my body so far today um, bone broth, Parmesan cheese, meatballs, and eggs,
Nice.
and coffee.
Excellent. Oh,
I
that's just,
I eat fruit and veggies and stuff, but usually just in the evenings and afternoons. I started my career as a cheesemaker, and I am European descent. Cheese just works for me.
yeah.
Great. As long as it's like a dry, natural cheese. So I usually start my days with Parmesan and coffee. And then like I kind of fasted last night, just sort of by accident, and I was busy and kind of just cranked through the day. So I was really hungry. So I made myself 3 scrambled eggs with a lot of olive oil. And then I got the hungries around 1, and I had a package of meatballs. So, and some bone broth.
Nice.
On
Uh,
brand.
totally on brand. And
And I am raising a duck as we speak.
yeah, right before we
Ducks
click
are being raised.
record, she had to get up and go into her kitchen and check on the duck that's braising currently. So awesome. No, I mean it's no surprise that you are actually living what you are providing to people, and that's genuine and authentic. And I think that for anybody that goes to the website or that has heard any sort of endorsement or your appearance on any other podcast, I think that they know that you are down to earth. You live what you talk about. This is not smoke and mirrors. You're not glorifying anything. You're just actually promoting sustainable foods, regenerative agriculture, and eating in the way that we were kind of meant to eat, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think my, I'm obviously not a nutrition expert or a dietitian, but I can speak to my own experiences, and my expertise is in the farming and agriculture side and building brands and running a business, right? But in my own experience, I typically don't get movement in the first thing of the day. I usually get a little bit, like first you get my sunlight and like, do a little bit of medicine ball or something or some stretching. But I try to just stay on that like low carb and high protein until I'm going to move. That's just kind of what works best for me. It keeps me locked in and focused. And I try to like get my 7 a.m. till 3 p.m. stretch of like hard focused brain energy, and then eat some fruit, lift up a little bit, have plants. So I'm not totally, I'm not all animal all the time. But I think about it in terms of the functionality in my day, right? So I do think that animal proteins and animal products in general are one of nature's perfect foods, right? And I think my goal has been to offer a version of those foods that is as close to perfect as possible, right? So that you're answering all of the kind of potentially questionable and challenging issues around sourcing, treatment, slaughter, processing, all that stuff is off the table as an area of concern.
Yeah, yeah, we're definitely going to get into that because it is an explanation that needs revisiting over and over and over to debunk the critics, and to talk about how to do this right. And there's so many places I want to go, and I rarely write down questions, maybe one or two before guests, because I like the conversation to be really organic and natural. But I have a couple of really specific questions that I'd like to get into. So, I mean, as a someone who's been paying attention to nutrition for my adult life, I look at the paleo movement into keto, into carnivore. In the last couple of years, how has the emergence and the popularity? I mean, the number one podcaster on the planet is basically living off of elk meat and using his Traeger every day, and having carnivore experts on all the time. How has that been in tandem with the growth of Belcampo as a company?
It's a great question. so in the early days of this company, I started the company in 2012. I remember we had our first little restaurant, which has since closed in Marin, and which is just north in the Bay Area of where I am. And it was we kept on hearing, it's like, yeah, we're selling this and selling that. I just started this first restaurant, my first restaurant. It was a very challenging time. And it was like, but we have these guys who come in and they'll just pound like 2 chickens each. And because I had rotisserie chickens on, I'm like, wow, I wish I could find more of those guys.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there weren't more of those guys at the time, but they have emerged, So I really pivoted the business to embracing health at the end of 2017. And before that, I positioned it as a gourmet business. Now, I have always been in the culinary space professionally, and I'd say in the wellness space personally. So pivoting towards wellness allowed me to align this business with more of my heart's mission around personal wellness. So that's always a good thing. And I think the fact that we're doing much better now is in part of that ability to align around your heart mission. And I had never felt like I fit in the culinary world because a lot of it is just really treating your body like a dumpster. And I was a judge on Iron Chef America for 10 years. And I would do that for 4 or 5 days of shooting, and I would be like sick for 2 weeks afterwards.
Oh.
Because it was all sous vide and tons of sugar and no attention to sourcing and no attention to ingredients. And everyone's like, that's so cool. And I'm like, that's kind of the part of my life that I'm least proud of in some ways, even though it was like the optics were really awesome. So I always felt that. And there's certainly some people within the culinary world, I'll call out like Bobby Flay and Alton Brown, who personally were really into health. And I really bonded with those people. But a lot of people sort of celebrated this, like, I'm just going, I'm going 90 miles an hour towards the wall and I know it and I'm going. And that was not just the food, it was the bourbon and the weed and the whole package, right?
Yeah.
That's the culture. And so that I never felt like I vibed in that world. I always felt like I was just not willing to make those trade-offs. So the wellness world is also extreme in different ways. Right. I'm not, it's a totally balanced world. There's the same type of like, every world has the extremes of their bell curve, but positioning Belcampo between wellness and culinary allowed me to kind of be more in line with saying, like, I'm not just about like deep fried whatever pork belly with some sugary canola teriyaki sauce on it. No way. That's not my vibe. That's going to inflame. I don't care where that pork is from. That's going to make you sick. So that kind of stuff was a good pivot for me to build the wellness piece in. Now, so 2012 to 17, the business grew. We opened restaurants. We were building the brand and building the business, but I think things came together much more in 17 for me when I really decided to pivot towards wellness. And then by the end of 2018, I'd actually gone through our restaurants and like taken out all the soy, all the canola, all the seed oils, pure, like just done all the little ticky tacky things that really made the restaurant experience in line with the wellness mission. And then we still have indulgent things. We still have like a fried chicken sandwich. It's not like it's a totally virtuous, thing. We still have ice cream and stuff like that. But it was more that where if you wanted to opt into something that was a really clean meal, like I'm proud of right now, I cook all the time. So I love to cook, but this past 2 weeks has been super busy, and I've ordered Belcampo delivered to my home, like 4 nights out of the past 5. It's like I love that I can get, super clean, get it delivered. I know if you navigate the menu right, and you can fit into whatever plan you're doing. That's why we designed it. So that's been a great, piece. It's like we added on sort of a superpower, another level where people could utilize the brand in a different way. Yeah. Now with COVID, we're getting more and more focused on e-commerce, and our retail channel is growing as well. So all of this stuff is just at that point, you're not talking about engineering a restaurant to appeal to a certain, world or to meet a certain unmet demand. At that point, this all becomes a broader conversation about like, how do I position a meat brand to be in support of wellness, not just in the branding, but in terms of everything about what we do in the production of that product.
Yeah. That's clear. It's clear to me, all the branding, the language you speak, how you position it, the focus on soil, just soil alone, how important soil is, how the regenerative farming techniques that you guys employ are actually beneficial to the planet. For a guy like myself who, cares a lot about nutrition, has eaten carnivore for a while, tried it, I'm no longer there, but, having conversations and listening to conversations with experts who are trying to make the world a better place. And I think of like Paul Chek, who constantly talks about the number one important thing in the whole world is that we get our soil figured out. Listen to, folks like Dr. Zach Bush, who's it's all about soil. It's all about regenerative farming. Like we will not survive as a species unless we get this thing figured out. And that's contrasted by the vegan movement and the vegetarian movement. And for me, I take a lot of pride in being able to provide folks like yourself a platform to speak openly and honestly about how regenerative farming works, why it's a good thing. And so I'm going to ask you to get in a little bit in the weeds into how regenerative farming works and how the hell you manage 27,000 acres with all of these animals. So how important, really level with us, how important is the integrity of soil to humanity?
Impoverished soil can't yield good nutrition. I'm sure you are familiar, and your listeners are, with the statistics around how the nutritional value of things like broccoli and chicken and tomatoes and oranges has all guttered in the past 40, 50 years, right? Like there's all this great data that says it's got the same amount of calories, but it has way less protein and vitamin C and vitamin whatever, right? Why has that happened? Well, where do the vitamins in plants come from? We'll start with there. They come from root systems that extract them from soil. When you're growing plants on impoverished soil, there is not the nutrient density. So it's not that industrial agriculture produces lower quality foods. It's that industrial agriculture impoverishes soil. That soil in turn cannot produce high quality foods. It's very simple. Talk about carbon in soil. Part of it's cool. Like carbon is bad when it's in the environment. Put it in the earth and it's sequestered and everybody wins. What does it do in the earth? It actually feeds the microbiome of the soil. Just like our guts, soil has its own microbiome. The vitality of that microbiome is just like our guts. It supports the vitality of the organisms that survive on top of it. If you have carbon impoverished soil, it cannot support the rhizomes, the nematodes, all the components of the microbiome of soil, which have to do with everything from bacteria to microroots to special types of organisms to tiny little worms. And there's like literally billions of things going on there. When you impoverish the soil and you kill all of that off, the carbon leaches out of it, and then the carbon in turn is not in there to then support the vitality of those systems. So it's a lose-lose. And that's where with the idea of taking animals out of the ecosystem, like a vegan argument, animals are crucial to the carbon fixing cycle in the soil in many ecosystems. There's always an exception, right? But in the ecosystems that characterize many great ecosystems of the world, right? I'll talk about prairies here primarily, and what's called a brittle ecosystem, which is like not particularly lush. This is where we farm in Northern California. Another brittle ecosystem is like in South Africa. There's giant, like any prairie ruminant ecosystem. These are brittle ecosystems that are considered like a little bit fragile, right? Like they require everything to kind of happen in a certain order. One of the things that happens in a brittle ecosystem, typically in the wild, is the arrival of vast numbers of ruminants that deposit fertilizer, consume plants, deposit seed pods in their fertilizer, till the earth with their hooves. A bunch of different things happen. It happens in a seasonality, in a seasonal cycle. That's all crucial to the carbon cycling of that soil. So when we deplete carbon from the soil, we're taking the potential for nutrition out of our food.
And then amplify that over a couple of decades with increasing monocrops, and pretty soon there's no nutrients left in the soil. Just going back to the point, like, you're right.
It's even faster than you think.
Yeah.
Though, because we've dramatically increased soil in our farm in 7 years. We've tracked it with a third-party group. Dramatically increased.
Really?
Yeah. And it's actually, this is amazing. We started the company in 2012. In 2014, the drought started, right, in California. Do you remember there's a big drought in
Yeah.
California? And such a mess for that time, right? It's okay. We're still here today. But that drought lasted like 2 years, right? And in that time, our farm was so much greener than neighboring farms that local farmers accused my operation of stealing water.
Oh.
Okay. And there was like a legitimate accusation in the community that Belcampo was stealing water from the aquifer or taking more than our rights. We don't have ditches, irrigation ditches. It's drawing off of an aquifer, but we were basically accused of stealing water. And the reason why was that our crops were so much greener than our neighbors. The reason why we were that much greener did not have to do with water. We actually probably had worse irrigation systems than most of our neighbors did because the farm at that point was fairly derelict. But it was about animal matter and it was intentional, like managed grazing that had done that. So that was like 3 years in to Belcampo. That was already very evident, the difference in practices. So it happens really quickly because think about it, the other thing that, so carbon increases the density of the microbiome of the soil. All these little teeny root systems and little bugs and poop and bacteria and stuff is in there, and it forms this like nice, like solid matrix. So when you hear about massive like flash floods in the Midwest, right, and then thousands of acres of farmland are ruined, why are there flash floods? Because that microbiome holds organic matter. And the structure of that, the tensile strength of that microbiome, plus what's in it, is what protects the earth from floods and protects you from erosion of your topsoil. So that's an extreme example. So if you use, if you use Roundup, right, which is the most commonly used pesticide, we all know about the impacts of that chemical on our bodies. If you use that, you kill the microbiome, right? The herbicide impact of that are as devastating below the ground as they are to non-GMO crops above the ground. Okay. So all of the leaves that would fall off the pine tree, if you spray it with Roundup, will fall off. Everything dies under the earth too. So that's really when you hear about these flash floods happening in agricultural areas, it's because the use of Roundup has so quickly devastated the microbiome below the soil, right? As have continual tilling and annual cropping and all those different lack of resting the land and lack of using animals, all those different things together, right? That takes away the glue that holds the earth together when there's a big event, right? So if that's what happened when it rains a lot, you can imagine when it rains a little, there's going to be a similar leaching and a lack of ability to respond to that in the earth.
Right.
Okay, so we don't want to sequester carbon just because it's good for the planet. We want to sequester carbon because it's the nutrition for the soil that feeds the production of healthier food. It's kind of confusing to me. I was just reading about this with pastured eggs. Like pastured eggs have 3 times the protein of a non-pastured than of a battery egg. 3 times, but the same amount of calories. So, and I kind of wonder that with broccoli and stuff too. I'm like, how does it have what is the other stuff that makes up? I need to learn more about that, but I don't know like what else comes in. I'm assuming it's just like more fibrous. In general, I've seen just observationally in plants and animals, like slower growing tends to be more soluble. So it's like finer fibers. It dissolves more quickly. It's got a longer flavor. It's got a more intense flavor. It's smaller, things like slower growing has all these characteristics. It's sweeter. And then faster growing tends to be more fibrous and ropey, have less solubility, and less sweetness. So all these different kind of characters that I just observe in plants and animals around speed of growth in agriculture. But I kind of wonder like, well, what else is in there when you're growing it that fast? But I mean, this is all. And the thing that's amazing too is that it looks the same, but you see some of the statistics, like oranges have like 1/40th of the nutritional content that they used to have.
No way. Oh my gosh.
Chicken has like 1/3 the protein that it used to have on a per serving basis.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to know. It's all over my head, of course, but I would love to know. Then, like, well, then where does it go? Right, like to your point, like if there's 1/3 less protein, it's the same chicken, but it's just less. It's just less quality, less protein folding, and I don't know. Geez.
So, and then the crazy thing is that the time that we're benchmarking against then was the 1950s, or those studies about the protein in chicken, At that time, the average chicken lived over 50 weeks, almost a year to maturity. And today, the average commercial broiler is 2.5 weeks to maturity.
Whoa.
And they're finishing out at the same weight, which means that they're slaughtered at the same weight. So it takes 25 times as long in the old-fashioned way. So there's certainly a very different musculature, structure, everything else, right? And in our operation, it's 10 weeks. So it's 5 times as long. Okay. So it's like in a traditional operation for chickens, it might have been like 40% of their feed was coming naturally from them pecking at grubs and stuff like that. In like Belcampo's operations, 15% comes from that, just from them being outdoors, and the remainder is from grain. So there's a spectrum, right, of speed and the trade-off associated with that speed. But there's been a massive transformation. And I think that's part of why supplementation is so prevalent now and for so many people, because if you're shopping at a conventional American grocery store, you're not getting the high nutritional value food. You're just
you're not getting food. You're getting you're not getting food has been a really focus for me and my family. We spend most of our money on high quality food. We think of food as medicine, so that my kids can grow up big and strong, and we are very intentional. Like we went half on a half cow on a cow that my cousin grew in Eastern Washington. It was his first foray into raising beef, and it's a different animal. It is, when you go from like a USDA from Safeway or whatever, Winco, and you eat that, and then you eat a grass-fed, grass-finished, beef from 50 miles away, it doesn't even taste the same. It's richer. It is a little, the texture is a little bit different. One of my questions for you is for an organization like Belcampo, who it's like this sticking to the basics, keeping the small farm idea, but doing it at scale. That must be quite an endeavor to try to make sure that your profit margins are okay, but you're waiting long enough to raise the chicken before harvest, before packing. Like, how many brilliant people do you have thinking and working on how to do this in a sustainable way that's good for the environment and also good for the consumer and also good for the company?
That's the question.
Yeah, right.
I mean, honestly, it's been really, really challenging, and it's almost like we're selling a product that doesn't exist anymore. And the reasons it doesn't exist is that we have culturally chosen cheap meat, right? We have been offered cheap meat and we've just said, bring it, right? So that's the problem, is that we operate in a way that's kind of fundamentally anti-economical, right? We're willfully inefficient. We could do everything cheaper and faster. And that's been the challenge, is figuring all that out. Everything, I mean, even most meat production companies are buying in, boxed meats and then just packaging it differently, right? So they're buying things that have already been processed. Typically when somebody buys a product at the grocery store, I once mapped this out in a flow chart, but with a couple of people who know the industry, the conventional industry, better than I do, and it's between 10 and 25 companies have been involved in the transaction. So if you take that compared to Belcampo, which is like our farms, our own slaughterhouse, some of our products are co-packed, like we use a manufacturer, like my meatballs and the bone broth are actually made in facilities that have specialized equipment. And then some of them are made in our plant, just depends. But even that case, it's still just 2 companies. So even in the most fabricated Belcampo products, so just a vastly different system. And you would think, oh, wow, there's lots more margin you can capture in that. But the problem is that the cost of our ingredients is just so much higher, because we're doing 100% grass. We're taking the animals to 24 to 26 months of age compared to 18. And we're doing that because, when you grow animals free range, it takes a lot longer to get consistent flavor.
Yeah.
To take them longer. And that's kind of like, it's been the problem in grass-fed product, I think. And the reason that it's gotten a reputation for being inconsistent is that often the animals are slaughtered in adolescence and they haven't gone through their full sexual maturity. And we know this as being humans. When you go through puberty, your ability to put on fat changes. Like if you're a woman, you all of a sudden get like fat on your hips and like you get boobs, like you get all this extra muscular fat, right? In certain places that when you go through puberty, that's just purely hormonal. And so your body's ability to accumulate fat, I mean, my, 8-year-old daughter can eat whatever she wants and she's skinny as a rail. I can't. And that has to do with my hormonal profile, right? Primarily, and activity levels and things like that. But like there's a major metabolic function change that happens in puberty. In animals, that's crucial because fat is precious. It adds tons of taste and flavor. And then additionally, there's some interesting effects that happen that I've just observed. Again, this isn't widely documented, but adolescent animals is you get like livery and gamey flavors that I think are just moments on the pheromone evolution, where you're capturing them at some moment of like, I don't know what, like testicular or like secondary sexual thing is happening in their body, but it'll give this sort of pronounced gamey or livery flavor. And when you have animals that have gone through puberty, those things normalize and stabilize as a more consistent product. So to achieve that consistent product, we're taking animals to a more advanced age, and that also, implies a greater cost. So all that stuff is just, those are the real challenges in the business. What I will say is what I've learned. I think I can focus on the positive and where I'm going with things. And so one thing that I'm doing now is launching our very first set of like fully cooked and ready to go products. Early on, we would really like sell you big chunks of meat and heads and toes and tongues and tails and all types of organ meats. And I am now doing a great business in organ meats. It's taken a while for that business to evolve, but we just launched our fully cooked meatballs, or fully cooked carnitas. I've got 7 more products like that lined up for launch next year. So we're trying to take a really high quality product, but meet the American consumer more where they are, right? I don't care. I mean, Instant Pot's great, but there's some days when you don't want to braise, you don't want to have to do all that. So one thing that I've learned is like, take this super A+ product and put it in the format that meets people where their needs are. That's learning. Cause I kind of realized like, I'm not going to be the woman who teaches America to cook shanks. Right? But I'd like to be the woman who supports the scaling of a truly regenerative business to a scale where it becomes meaningfully accessible. I'd like to be that woman. Yeah. So to that, I have to put the product into a format that makes it easier for consumers to use it. So that's one kind of major learning. Second major piece is that we are, and our team is collectively launching an amazing partner farm program now. We have our first partner farms for next year lined up. We've done our first deal for poultry. So we're working with farmers that are in our area to convert them to fully regenerative practices. And then we're effectively serving as the marketing distribution arm for that product.
Cool.
So a huge step. And that's not, I mean, even in 2021, 90+% of my products are still directly from that piece of land at the base of Mount Shasta. All that's still the story. But then in the future, I feel like it's a more meaningful thing. And instead of saying, oh yeah, we now manage about 30,000 acres and then we're going to manage 300,000 acres. It's like, I'd rather help a bunch of farmers that are doing things well, do them even better, and then market and support their scale, right? And truly regenerative practices. So that's really the thrust for me, is expanding through partnership.
Oh, it's so good.
Say like, those are the insights about how we're getting better, which tells you the reality of what the challenges have been so far.
Yeah. Well, we as consumers win. Your attention to detail. We're having the carnitas for dinner tonight. As soon as I got my box, I immediately was like, it was like Christmas. It was early Christmas for me, like pulling out like this pouch of bone broth and being like, oh my God, I can't wait to eat this. Immediately, like, thawing the steak. And as soon as it was thawed, throwing it on the grill. The taste is incredible. I mean, the finished product, what people get, what they unbox and what they consume and cook for them and themselves and their family is such a great high quality. And I'm super picky, and my family is too. So I just want to say, you, from one guy here in the Pacific Northwest that has been able to sample and try at least a couple and another one tonight, it's such a tasty steak, and that bone broth was so good. I make my own bone broth, and when I got yours, it was like, oh, they're of course hers is way better. This is so much better. I did it.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I want you to feel like you're not making any sacrifices on taste quality. I want this to be the choice because it costs more. I mean, our meat costs a lot, right? We're top of market,
Yeah.
but I want when you're eating it, I want you to feel awesome, and I love that I can eat all of our products to the point of like total satiety and then feel amazing the next day. There's never like a meat hangover or any of that garbage that you feel when you eat crummy stuff. A lot of that's due to saucing and that kind of thing. But I think a lot of it's also just that there's, really fast growing protein. The fats have a lot of toxicity in them. I think there's BPA. I mean, there's just like stuff in that meat a lot of times. And then also the fact that a lot of industrial products are soaked in antimicrobials. So all the chicken that you buy in conventional grocery stores is soaked in bleach and lactic acid. So it's active.
Oh.
So it's like you look at them and people have to take, Tums or an antacid after every meal. It's like, yeah, because you're suppressing your microbiome while you're eating it. So of course you need to fix it on the way through, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on there. But I really want the taste quality to win. But it's hard because, the trade-offs on taste quality and around slow growing, it's all about spending more money.
Yeah.
It's like every single thing we do that's the right choice. There's never a thing that's like, well, the right choice would be this. It's like, well, great, that's also the cheaper thing to do.
Yeah, right.
Now, unfortunately, they're always connected to more expensive. But that's like, I think that the market's out there for people who want that product. That's really spectacular. And we're looking now, preliminarily, our beef is very, very similar to game in terms of its nutritional profile. We're a 1-to-1 omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. I
did not know that.
So in terms of the what you're eating when you eat it, it's analogous to an elk, right? It's got that characteristic. So if you look at it that way too, it's like, well, there's value for money, right?
Oh my gosh, I did not know that. That is so cool. Wow. Oh man.
If you're raising them in a truly evolutionary diet,
right?
And that's actually, it's been interesting to me. I've tested many of my competitors over the years, and I come across plenty of like labeled grass-fed and finished meat that has an omega-3 to omega-6 ratio that's like 1-to-12. And so that means, a couple things. It can mean that people are acting out of integrity, but it also could mean that you're, mixing in grass with grass seed, right, in pellets. So you can legally use a grass seed pellet. You can fatten an animal at 18 months and still call it grass-fed.
Really?
Finished.
I did not know that either. Oh, that's cheating.
It's high in omega-6s. I don't know how prevalent that is, but I definitely have seen those profiles in products that are widely commercialized, and it kind of explains there's huge variability. Sometimes you see grass-finished meat that's like ridiculously marbled, and it's like, how do you do that? I mean, we all know it's very difficult to get super burly and fatty on spinach, right? We're not ruminants, but like it's analogous. You have to walk around, gather the grass, chew it. I mean, it's difficult to put on a lot of fat with that diet for animals too. So there's things you can do, like sorghum is a grass. It's a very high sugar grass, but it's technically a grass. So in certain areas it's feeding sorghum. So there's like kind of workarounds on that. But we do that regular testing on our omega-3 to 6 ratio because it's what we spend for, so I want to share it with consumers. And I'm on the cusp of communicating that information more about how analogous it is to wild game, because I think it helps people understand the price difference,
Yeah.
I think people are like, well, it's bison, so of course I'm spending $9.99 a pound for a ground bison. It's like when that's like my ground beef in there. Why is it $9.99 a pound? Because it's like bison.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Wild meat. I mean, it takes the same amount of time to raise and takes the same amount of grass, right? So these are ruminants, and they all behave, similarly in terms of their gut and their ability to metabolize and turn it into quality meat, right?
I think people are getting hip to that. I mean, and of course, I'm in a little bit of a bubble here with the biohacker, nutrition kind of universe that I live in. But I think there is an increasing number of people who are highly active, who are successfully, professionally successful, who also spend money on supplements and exercise equipment, that would love to know that the cow that they're eating has the same profile as a game meat, and again, I think to the prevalence of the carnivore diet and how more frequently it's coming up. just it keeps coming up. And there's, Paul Saladino and Sean Baker, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson. It just keeps coming up over and over. Like, if you have food allergies, if you have inflammation, if you have arthritis, if you have gut issues, like, you should just try this. You should just try it for a month, and then watch how your symptoms go away. So I for one think that it would be that it would make a lot of sense to make that comparison, because I think people are ready for it. Okay, I have so many more questions. This is fascinating to me. Obviously, I'm enthusiastic about this, and I'm so glad to be talking to you. Is there a place in the world for a meat alternative, the Beyond Burger or lab grown meat? Is there any sort of parallel universe where that makes sense?
I don't think so. I see those as highly processed grain and legume based products. To me, it's another way for the agro-industrial system in America to get us to eat a highly processed, fabricated, micronutrient poor piece of garbage like a box of cereal is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same. And I also think it's not casual that those companies are so vested in that product, because they're like, if you look at the sales, I mean, COVID kind of turned things upside down, but Heinz is cratering, Kraft is cratering, Quaker's cratering. I mean, all these traditionally highly processed middle of the store products have cratered in their sales. They're losing market share. And so what are they doing? They're like, wait, what else can we find out? Can we make that fits this profile, where it's shelf stable and made out of the same garbage and has no traceability.
Yeah.
It fits all the profile, And okay, as a child of Eugene, Oregon, I am a big fan of veggie burgers, right?
With mushrooms in them, right?
Yeah, mushrooms and beets, and we actually make one at the farm even that we sell in some of our restaurants. It's great. It's fine. It's like, it's a yummy thing. Sometimes I crave that stuff, but I want it to then look like a veggie burger and have pieces of vegetables in it. Is there a space for something that's browned and disc shaped that's made out of vegetables? Hell yeah. But does it need to be something that mimics meat? The other really kind of interesting thing to me about that, if you kind of look at the arc of those companies, right? They started out marketing with really fancy chefs, and they got these sort of like surprisingly credible big names. I won't name them here, but you can Google it and look around. There's some big names that are like happily cooking up Impossible burgers in their fancy, Michelin restaurants. Awesome. Congrats. Then they got these guys landed. I don't know what the contracts were, what that looked like, or if they may have been organic endorsements, who knows. And then pretty quickly, those products are on the menu at like Burger King. And then all of a sudden, if you're a, family in Seattle, Washington, and you're having friends over for dinner, I don't care what income bracket, but there's no way you're cooking up something that's on the menu at Burger King for them. You're not like, I know you can get this at Burger King, but you got to try my version.
Yeah.
No effing way are you doing it, right?
Right.
So that's confusing to me. So I'm like, was that the plan to totally pivot away from that? And then, of course, then you look at it and it's like the sad kind of reality, I think, is that these brands may be ultimately really positioned to take advantage of the really disenfranchised and ignorant and people without resources. There's also part of me that looks like it's kind of, the amount that those companies are spending to expand in China. It's like, really trying to sell it abroad, to sell it to people with very few options for real meat.
Yeah.
And that's, it's, if you think about it, even look at the placement and the push that like McDonald's is doing, and look at the, McDonald's is now at 30% of its clientele is Black, right? It's a Black brand. It's, like 3 times the representation than what are in the US. And it's not a chain known for healthy options. And now it's pushing that to a community that is, higher index for some health issues. It's like kind of an unfortunate, where it's like, wow, these poor communities in the Southeast, primarily Black, are where these big CAFOs are located, and it's like, it's like you're getting the effluent of the animal agriculture system and you're not even getting the product. It's like sort of such a mess, right? But it's
Yeah.
like basically being marketed to the disenfranchised now.
Yeah.
And it looks like I think the petri dish meat may be more of a, but you even look at like, there's definitely like the upscale, like skinny girl vegan crowd in like LA, but they're not talking about Impossible Burgers. They're making really fancy parfaits and stuff, like they're doing something that has nothing to do with Impossible Burgers, right? Like
Yeah.
the chic, like skinny thing, like that's a different menu. So I look at where they're positioning. It's like, you're not trying to go for cool vegans. You're not going for affluent people interested in the environment. So you're basically offering a product to kind of like the misinformed or poorly informed and or socially economically disenfranchised.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it's playing out. So then petri dish meat is complex. Every couple of years, petri dish meat makes a big thing. And they get in a bunch of, like, there's an article in like the Financial Times, there's an article in The Economist, and it's like there's some PR firm like hired by some group of biotech that's just like, now's the time, let's do another story about petri dish meat.
Yeah.
Problem with petri dish meat, I think it's enough of an ick factor that even the deeply disenfranchised will be grossed out by it.
Right.
I think you can't even sell that to people who have no choices, unlike the Impossible Burgers. So I'm being, I don't know I don't think that it takes much of a, you don't need a causality kind of evidence to say, wow, I'm going to avoid putting spontaneously populating meat cells into my own body.
Ooh, yeah.
Spontaneously populating meat cells. It's called a tumor.
Oh, you're right, though.
I mean, that's what they're doing. Like,
Yeah.
what meat cell can you put into it's called cancer, and it's
Yeah.
called. Those are the only other evidence. That's what they're doing.
Right.
So there's like the lab days. I mean, who knows? There may be a day when we're like so cool with everything and it's all fine. But I mean, think about it, how people get so freaked out about 5G. Like, what about spontaneously growing, cells that share 99% of their DNA with us?
Yeah.
The body?
Right.
I feel like there's going to be, so I would hope there's going to be like a grandmother's revolt around the globe against that.
Yeah.
But it's like, it seems these things just keep on falling to the bottom of the pyramid, unfortunately. They come out being positioned as like the whole like elite of the world is going to gravitate towards this and reject real meat. And sadly, the real meat remains for the elite, really.
Yeah.
And these things filter down to people who don't have access or resources. And it's really unfortunate. It's a really sad kind of trend because these things typically also don't have the greatest health outcomes.
Yeah, right. Well, I was so darn curious. I had one of the greatest proponents of Beyond Meat come in and explain to me, how's it made, how's it grown, what's the nutrient density, what's the profile. You can make like a little piece of jerky, Beyond Jerky, and it's like the size of a silver dollar, and it costs $120. He's like, it's pretty good. Like, miss me on that.
Yeah. I mean, the cost basis that you bring up something interesting. If you look at the SEC filings for Beyond, their ingredient costs are still like $30 a package, right?
Right.
That's with the plasma stuff too, the petri dish stuff. It's like $30,000 for a patty. So there's a huge cost. The presumption is that these will tap some major unmet need, and then will catch some huge upswell in consumer demand, and then achieve scale and become viable. I don't know. Like maybe, but there's an interesting thing, which is like, I remember I did a panel with somebody from Beyond Meat, a really lovely, very well-intentioned person, and we were just making chit chat, and she said to me, there's we've been surprised that like 20% of our clients are vegans, but that number is going down. I'm like, why? This wasn't meant to meet the vegans. This product was meant to meet the American who wants to reject meat. And I'm like, okay, but the idea is that by offering something analogous to meat, you're going to take another whole chunk of the market. So instead of taking a piece out of the pie for vegans, you're going to take a piece out of a much bigger pie because vegans are still only like 2% or whatever. And I don't see that really happening.
Yeah. I have part of me wants to ask about other meat alternatives, but we're gonna skip it because there's other things I want to talk about. Crickets, we'll just say crickets.
Crickets take more protein to raise than chicken.
Wow, per pound.
Huh?
Wow.
Study out of UC Davis that shows that.
Wow.
So they're not efficient. You know what is efficient? Black fly larvae. If you really want to do something environmental, it's maggots. I looked into the reason I know is I looked into crickets as pig feed. Okay, because protein requirements in pigs is massive, and for us using really high quality ingredients and feed for everything, it's super expensive. Our pork prices are astronomical. I'm having to raise them right now because feed costs are so high. So a couple of years ago was like, where else could I find, great efficient protein? And pigs are omnivores. They happily eat meat. Our pigs on our farm hunt and kill rattlesnakes.
Cool.
Okay? They'll eat meat all day long. And so we looked into that, and and the crickets, as soon as I hit a wall really quickly, because I was like, what about crickets? Seeing it all over the press. It's like, well, they actually take more protein to raise per pound. They're less efficient than chicken. So then what I've learned was that the only thing we could do that would be cost effective would be black fly larvae. And then the idea of like putting a giant maggot farm on our farm, I just couldn't stomach it.
That's bad.
Flies, they're a pest for the animals. So that didn't make any sense. It's like you get a leak in that operation. But yeah, isn't that crazy, the cricket thing?
Yeah, I did not know that. Yeah, you don't want to be in the maggot business, I'm sure. That's bad optics. That's crazy. Okay, so I have questions about the coronavirus effects and what I've heard about, meat shortages, especially beef shortages. Is that true? Is it false? Is it myth? I remember a month or two ago, I kept hearing like stock up on red meat because it's about to be, you're about to not be able to have access to it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. What happened in COVID was a couple things. First off, the meat supply chain is extremely efficient, and that efficiency is predicated on long-term planning. You plan 2 years out in terms of where you're buying animals, how many animals, how they're getting killed, how they're getting processed. So any large surge in purchasing that isn't planned for and is out of cycle has huge knock-on effects because it's not a supply chain that can pivot quickly to a new demand. So the near-term shortages were just because there's, just massive infrastructure around this and huge POs, purchase orders, and huge structural efficiencies. So when, you're talking about in a batch of beef jerky for Belcampo is like 5,000 pounds. For most companies, like 500,000 pounds. So it's not trivial to make another batch if you sell it all. So one of the big meat shortages was around that. Another major issue that happened was on the supply side because the restaurant industry cratered. Many animal production companies cater just to food service. Again, this is a very structured system. So if, let's say, barbecue company X, Sizzler went out of business, California Pizza Kitchen went out of business, all these companies went out. They all went bankrupt. 50% of American restaurants have gone bankrupt in the past 9 months. So that means that they're buying 75% less meat. Unfortunately, the way the system is, if I'm a pig farmer and I sell into food service for whatever airlines, I can't take that product and easily find another market for it because of the way that it's fabricated and processed. So that's where you heard about like all these farmers doing abortions for their pigs and billions of eggs being thrown into waste streams. It's horrific. Because the way that the channels are is so rigid that you can't just sort of say, oh, great, these guys aren't buying this type of beef. No problem. We'll just sell it over here like I can as a small business. It just highly structured. These POs go multiple years in advance. So even though there's tons of companies running out of meat, there's also tons of companies dumping product literally and killing the animals and disposing of them because the supply chain can't pivot quick enough. That's one part of it. Second part, so that was really March, April, May. Second thing was June, July, August. And that was cultural. And that had to do with meat plants having massive outbreaks of COVID. And the degree to which that happened has not been discussed. It came out a little bit when Smithfield shut down some plants and Tyson did. But I was aware of it just being in the industry that it's still ongoing. Meat plants continue to have very high, in fact, we just got the new CDC stuff that meat plant workers are like top of the list for vaccinations because it's so prevalent. Now, why is it prevalent? Part of it appears to be the fact it's closed ventilation systems, it's very cold, it's favorable for the virus. And then these plants don't have natural air or water or air flow or windows opening because of contamination. So it's closed and it's chilled. So it's like a perfect environment for the virus to propagate. That's cultural issues, which is these plants were not proactive and didn't take steps. There's some great stories about this, and they really didn't take it worker safety seriously, and I'd say that's a cultural issue that you just need to think about that when you buy your product, whether or not you personally care about the health of whoever's cutting up that meat. You can disregard it, but just think about the implications of that cultural attitude to every aspect of how that process goes, right?
Yeah.
It's not paying attention to safety. And they have really pretty damning evidence in terms of internal communications where people were disregarding this. And then, up until June and July, there would be multiple deaths of COVID in a meat plant workforce, and no steps were taken, no follow-up was done to find out cause of death or anything. So they were actively not paying attention to it. So that's a bigger kind of cultural issue that I'd say it's not like these companies are evil. It's just that they're being held to a mandate around efficiency and cost management that's so extreme that they have no choice,
Interesting. Wow. How do you see it? I mean, how do you see it going forward? I mean, specifically around does the industry, because here you are as Belcampo, direct to consumer, really sort of not having to rely on that arm of the business to go to restaurants. How do you see that kind of shifting? How do you see the systems shifting from where it was to where it needs to go now?
I mean, I think the COVID crisis has highlighted for consumers many of the issues, right? So there's a big thing is that people are kind of woke to the issue, for lack of a better word, and that's a first step, right? Acknowledging that there is a problem with it, and people, the light of COVID shining on, wow, these are not great actors in the economy, right? That's the only kind of major shift that I've seen from it. I don't think this is a shift, though, Sean. I don't think that the meat system is going to slowly evolve and get incrementally better every year. I think that what we've seen with the Beyond Meats and the Impossible Foods is people saying, this is so bad, we want something totally different, or we think there's a market for something totally different, right? And that's kind of what I see Belcampo is we're offering something completely different, albeit natural meat, right? But I think it's a breaking and reforming thing more than, and I think COVID was just the first of a major fissures. The other thing to note is that COVID is fundamentally a disease that comes from the abuse of animals, right? It comes from trafficked animals in wet markets. We've shown that. It comes from having crates of pangolins on top of crates of bats in confined, non-natural systems, so a disease hop species. SARS was also from a similar thing. Avian flu, swine flu. These are all the recent animal diseases, just one moment.
No problem.
Sorry.
That's okay.
This is the work from home.
Is somebody getting the sauce ready for the duck?
As I need a sauce maker around here. None of that. Just the screaming. It's the kids get done. It's I keep on having fantasies of having a really quiet little secluded space, but I kind of like being in the thick of it. And then there's the desk. It's like I'm here. I'm gonna keep eyes on things. The question for me is with COVID coming from the abuse of animals, it looks to me like the next most likely place to sort of leave it for you to think about too is when we look at swine flu and avian flu and SARS and COVID all coming from animals being trapped, being confined, not having a healthy environment, and then their diseases jumping because of proximity to humans and confinement and multiplication and density of disease, right? That's the kind of magic cocktail that got us into this shitstorm that we're in right now. So looking ahead, where's the next one of these things going to come from?
Right.
Confinement animal operations. So I have sort of like a pretty dismal worldview lately, where I think it's likely that the next one of these big diseases is going to come from a CAFO. It's going to come from a confinement operation of some sort. So to think about a bigger picture, to plan for and manage against diseases, we're going to have to really rethink our relation to animals. Right. So, and it's not from a place of compassion, because I actually think that people aren't really motivated on a bigger picture for massive structural change around compassion. I think from a purely like disease management perspective, we need to be cognizant of the animal systems that feed our need for meat, feed our need for fur, feed our need for animal stuff, like pangolins were harvested for their scales, which is like a aphrodisiac, right? To feed our need for those things, we abuse animals. And when we abuse animals, we get sick as a result. And so in the US, we don't have the same trafficked animal thing that they do in Asia, but our equivalent is these confined animal operations, which are breeding grounds for disease, right? So I think there's going to be more breakage than there is going to be slow evolution. And that breakage is going to come from, I think it's coming to the boiling point around contamination and disease.
Wow. Well, I'm really glad that, I mean, I'm not delighted by the answer, but I'm glad I asked that question, because that makes sense to me. And, when we're living out of harmony with animal, if it's not animal husbandry and it's a CAFO, and we're out of sync with how we care for living beings on this planet, then things go wacky, things go sideways pretty fast. Yikes. What about, I want to kind of bring it back to Belcampo as a company. What, you've mentioned that the fully cooked is like sort of the next waves, and you've mentioned that you're expanding to include other farms, and use your use your farming practices, and use your distribution. What else? What 5 or 10 years can we look forward to as we continue to stay at home and order in, and our need for meats remains for those of us that can afford it and that really put meat and high quality food at a really high premium in our lives? How does Belcampo continue to evolve?
My focus now is reducing the transactional friction for my couple products. So I've come a long way. I mean, I actually started my first experience with meat was like yours. I bought a whole cow back in 2005. I just moved back from Italy. I got a big taste for animal products when I lived there for 7 years and ate a ton of meat, and I'd been a vegan beforehand. I really loved meat, realized it was great for my system. Came back, couldn't get that quality of meat, and bought a whole cow, and made like 50 meatloaves and taped my freezer shut. I had like electrically, that kind of stretchy electrical tape. I taped my freezer shut, and it was nuts. And I realized in that moment, okay, this is totally not scalable. I'm crazy. And so this is fine for me, right? But my journey from there has been all about reducing the friction, right? So that would be a high friction interaction, right? Having to buy a whole animal, do multiple emails, get a refrigerated van, deal with handling 600 pounds of meat. All this stuff is extremely high friction. So my journey has been about reducing the friction of that interaction.
Got it.
So that's the ongoing journey. At this point, the regenerative farming piece is solid. The farming operations exist. They're solid. We've been through the pain. It's scaling up that supply chain and continuing to make the product more accessible.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I can attest to that. Driving from Seattle to Kennewick and packing up, an entire cow split between me and my father and putting it into Tupperware bins with ice, and then driving it over the Rocky Mountains back to my house. It's like, that's a lot of work, man. That's
totally. And then it's also packaged in kind of not so appealing bags.
Yeah.
And there's liquid in there. There's purge.
Yeah.
There might be some thawing. Now we're transitioning to a full fresh line. So nothing's frozen. I mean, it will be when you buy it on e-com, but when you buy in my retail locations, like in our grocery stores, it'll never be frozen. It's packaged with a nitrogen flush where it can last 40 days in refrigerated. So it's like some pretty magical stuff that's going to happen for us. So it's all about like loading the front of the pipe of the current distribution system with different level of product. So you don't have to opt into a totally different distribution to buy stuff that's clean for your body and clean for animals. That's what I want to achieve.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, every one of my listeners will have already known who Belcampo is. I'm sure, because they're, highly intentional, detail oriented people. And now they got it straight from Anya. They got the straight skinny from Anya.
A big discount code too.
Yes.
Get you into our program.
Yes. I will have mentioned that by this point in the beginning of the show, and I'll mention it halfway through the show too. I can attest to the quality and the taste and the flavor. I'm excited for the carnitas tonight. I couldn't resist but just like open up the bone broth right away. It was so good. Beats the hell out of my Thanksgiving Day turkey carcass bone broth. It's good. I mean, my bone broth was okay that I did from the turkey carcass, but not like yours.
Yeah, the best thing for a turkey bone broth is ginger and shiitake. So that's what I do, because turkey's got that particular flavor to it. So the key things with turkey is it needs longer extraction than chicken. Chicken, you can make a damn good bone broth in like 4 hours. For turkey, I typically do a 24-hour simmer. So do it overnight in your oven covered, and then extract it with just take like a couple knobs of ginger, slice them, throw them in there, and then put in, I take like the stems of shiitake mushrooms, cook the mushroom caps, but keep the stems, throw in a bunch of those. That flavor profile really balances out the turkey. Oh. And that's with turkey, some of the best bone broth I've ever made is a turkey and beef blend. Those flavors go really well together. So that's my recommendation. But yeah, chicken bone broth, straight up ginger, some lemongrass in it is fantastic. But beef typically too, we put beef and pork together in ours because that flavor, it's like the flavors of those kind of complement each other really nicely. But for home bone broths, things can taste a little murky at times because people don't extract it for long enough. And extraction is really important because, bones are made out of matrices of collagen that then calcify. So when you're pregnant, your fetus is like, their bones actually started out as like a little gelatin matrix, and then that calcifies. So when you go the other way and you're taking the collagen out of the bones, it takes a really long, slow simmer. You can get it's easy to render collagen out of skin very quickly. In fact, collagen powder is made out of skin, typically of animals. So all the commercially available collagen is made out of hides, out of skin. But if you're trying to get it naturally out of bones, for a beef broth, I'll even do 30 plus hours of a simmer. And turkeys that grow a little bit slower. So chickens that grow in 10 weeks, like 3 or 4 hours, you can pretty much break that down to a meaningful level of extraction. And then with turkey, you need to go a lot longer.
I'll put that in my notes for next year, the ginger and shiitake, because you can imagine I didn't include that in my bone broth this year. I didn't know. I did simmer it for...
People mess around with like carrots and onions and broths. Like, don't bother. You're just going to make yourself an expensive onion with a lot of collagen in it. Don't do any aromatic. Just no, who needs a mushy carrot from the broth? Nobody does. And it's like, you can add a tiny bit of like coconut sugar or something if you want that same flavor. But I always look for my bone broths. I want to infuse it with things that are, and I like the functionality of it, but I also like hard things that don't absorb because it's just absorbing collagen otherwise. And then infusing with things that are going to assist in the metabolism, in the functionality of that in my body. So ginger is great for that, because with bone broth, I'm looking for absorption, like the ability to absorb the collagen, and ginger assists with that. What it does, it just makes it taste amazing. It adds more of the umami to it. So I always think that like the poultry adds like top notes to bone broth, and then the ruminants add the bottom notes to bone broth. And so I like the poultry and ruminant blends a lot too, because they like lamb with chicken is amazing. You kind of like those two because it adds this really round, big flavor to it.
Awesome. Oh man, that's cool.
Bone broth recipes. That's one thing. If you want a really simple, functional lunch, take our meatballs and warm them up in a couple cups of bone broth. Add a little bit of like lemon juice to that, or like little shaved ginger. So delicious, so simple.
In a saucepan on the stove, medium Yeah.
just boil the bone broth, toss the meatballs in, warm them up. It's like a little albondigas, kind of like a little soup with that. Because
Yeah.
it's also collagen. I love having collagen with my meat because it does really assist in the metabolism of your striated muscle. Collagen helps you extract more glutathione and get more nutrition out of your meat. So the fact that we focus so much of our meat consumption now on striated muscles, we don't eat the striated muscles along with the collagenous tissue. We are like ribeyes all day long, hamburgers. They're delicious. They're easier to chew, but they don't have the same full nutritional profile. So we've evolved accustomed to having our muscle fibers along with our collagenous tissue. And so our digestion, we work with those better in sync, right, together. So having your collagen with your bone broth, something with your steak or with your burger where possible, is a great way to enhance the nutritional benefit of those products.
Awesome tip. Oh man, so cool. I'm glad I went there. That's great. Cool. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I've got one more question, which is a fill in the blank. And then just before I ask the fill in the blank question, where can people learn more? Where can they, obviously I'll give them I'll give them the promo code and everything already, but where can they follow up?
You can follow us at Belcampo Meat Co. on Instagram, and I am at Anya Fernald, just my name. I typically do a lot of recipes and kind of wellness things, and on Belcampo we talk about our farming practices, about regenerative agriculture, lots of meat cooking tips there as well. And then belcampo.com. You can buy all the meats there.
Yeah, awesome. So here's my last question. It's a fill in the blank. And this can be based on just anything and everything that you know, and you can elaborate as much or as little as you like. If you would, please fill in the blank as you take your last sip of cold coffee. Everyone would benefit from knowing
how to tap into their intuition around food, around eating. I think we have this moment as women when you're pregnant where you're like, oh my God, I'm craving this, I'm craving that. And it's like the first time I think that people have a real understanding of their intuition about food, right? Where they're actually craving something, not in like a way that's perceived of as just being emotionally unhealthy. I think we have superpowers as humans around food, right? We know what can heal us and we also know what's not good for us, but we learn to ignore that information. So I think knowing how much intuition you have around food as a human, knowing how sophisticated your olfactory system is in assessing everything from like potential mates via their pheromones to what your gut needs right now for healing is a super interesting thing. It's something I've been like practicing in my own kind of wellness practice, is when I'm hungry, kind of considering some different foods and paying attention to my body's and emotional response to them. And I think a lot of times we think about like cravings as like, I'm going to eat 10 brownies. And it's like, no, cravings are actually, if you have them if you coach yourself around them, they can be things that tell you key stuff around your gut and your health and what you need to pay attention to right now. So there's something animals have in droves, right? And we see this all the time in grazing, where animals that are sick will eat bitter herbs. They'll gravitate towards natural antimicrobials when they're grazing. And that's something, we have that potential as well. We have that superpower, and we need to, I think, culturally learn to pay attention to it.
That is so insightful, Anya. That is so cool. I can't wait for you to write that book. You got all this free time on your hands. That is fascinating. I'm totally into that. I love that answer. That's so cool. Well, this has been a really great conversation, and I thank you very much, Anya, for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
And scene.